Hello again, John Neal here. Thank you very much for the comments about a watercolour video I did last. So some friends of mine said they'd never done any before and they wanted to start doing it, and they had a few problems. So I'm going to start right from the absolute basics and show you the equipment that I use and how to start off applying watercolour. Don't forget, of course, when you're dealing with watercolour painting, you're starting with coloured water, which is basically what it is, and you are adding it so it gets darker and darker. So you start with very light colours and work towards the darker ones, whereas with oil paints and acrylic paints you work the other way around. You can start with quite dark ones and add light ones on. You can't do it that way. So there are a lot of techniques to learn, and let's see if we can cover some of them for you today. One of my friends said he couldn't actually draw. He liked to do the painting but not the drawing. So that is another aspect to it, the draftsmanship, if you like, of drawing. And I've got a very good suggestion, and that is, check this guy out. It's Alphonso Dunn, and this book I bought has got some super stuff about pen and ink drawing, and his videos are absolutely excellent. So if you want to start from the very basics with drawing with pen and ink and or pencil, of course, I'd check him out. Put the link down below. Anyway, that aside, let's have a look at the equipment that I use. Okay, the first thing we'll need is some watercolour paper. You can see this is 300 grams per square metre. You can see all the other details there too. You need a fairly stout paper so that the water doesn't buckle the paper as you work on it. Right, having opened up the pad, a pencil is always a good start. You don't have to use a pen at all, but I like to just make a few marks, often with a pencil, just to give me some guidance to see where I'm going. And of course, along with the pencil is a drawing pen. There are various sorts you can get, and some you can of course just use some regular pens, but I love drawing with a pen. Here's one or two examples, and this one is just with a blue biro type thing with a bit of black thrown in as well. Okay, the brushes. A big brush like this is very useful. A nice soft brush. I've got a few of these of different shapes for big washes, and then a sable brush. Can be expensive, £5 or £6, but they're well worth it. And then these are not quite as expensive, the blue handled ones, one or two different sizes. That's a size 8 and the others are a size 2, and that last one is a rigger brush, which is quite interesting. There are lots of sorts of brushes. Oh, that fella, look at him. That's a damaged brush, very useful for doing trees and applying paint in a rather random fashion. Right, this is my palette. These are all the paints in different sections, and 3 mixing palette places below. Keep them nice and clean. The paints I use here are just squirted out of tubes, which I find quite convenient. But as I've said before, you can use just an ordinary block set of paints like this. I've used those many times. So don't worry if that is all you've got. That's fine. Here's a full view of both the paper and the palette. 2 pots of water, as you can see. Let's just move some water into the first palette and just use one colour only. I'll use this red and mix it to colour the water. That's quite a strong colour, and I'm just simply going to create a square of this colour and fill it in. And as the paint hits the paper, you'll see it seems to sink in and have a life of its own, which is fantastic and sometimes very difficult to control. But don't worry about that, just let it do what it does, and you'll find you've just got to work with that. Now this time I'm going to use just a little bit of colour to paint another square, which is basically just ordinary water. So there's no colour in this at all, really. And then I'll put the brush directly into the red paint and pull it on the top. Look at that! The way it bleeds into the water. Fantastic. Now this can be a bit haphazard, and you can just control it a little bit, as I'm doing here. And if you tilt the paper, you can use gravity for better effect. In fact, often I do paintings to start with a big wash of colour and water all over the paper, and work on a surface which is tilted. Right, this time I'll do it the other way around. I'll put some very, very dense paint for the next square, and then get the water right on the brush, and without touching it to start with, I'll just paint another patch of water, and then when you touch the water into the paint above it, that happens, which is a very similar effect as the one above, but the paint seems to react in a slightly different way, as you can see. Okay, the next little exercise we can do, notice I'm touching the brush on some kitchen roll at the top there each time to keep the amount of water just right. Right, let's imagine that we're going to draw a cylinder and then apply some paint to it and create these ideas with just water. I have to admit this ran a bit heavy. That's a bit too much colour in the water, and even there's probably still too much paint in it. So it wasn't quite what I wanted to demonstrate as on the left. But it does give me a chance to show you yet another technique, and that is to lift off the paint to create a lighter area. Now you can do it with just taking the brush fairly dry on the kitchen roll there, on some dry paper, but that isn't fully doing the job. So another way is to do that, and that's to squeeze it with your fingers, and really you can get quite a nice effect doing it this way. Squeeze the fingers again and pull the paint off. There, you've got to just get this right. That's a lovely effect. And a bit of shadow would help out. Beware of the wet patch. What wet patch? Oh, that one! Too late. Sorry about that. That was a mistake. But it just shows you've got to be careful. This is why I have a hairdryer close at hand to dry paint off completely. Otherwise, if you touch the colours together, wet in wet, it will run, as you've just seen. Right, here's another nice idea. Try this. Just dab the brush as if to make some sort of tree shapes in the distance, just with some green. Now that's all well and good, but the underside of that is the wrong shape. So just with water, look, pull it across, and you can create a sort of a misty effect quite nicely. If it was just to stay like that, it'd be fine, but it actually moves a little bit and creates other effects. Here you see I've done a number of these fading effects with water in water. Quite pleased with some of these. As a picture it's not very good, but there's different aspects to it which I quite like. The mountains at the top are done with a sort of a scrapey effect, and I'll show you this now. You can do this when you do trees, and that is to get the brush fairly dry and just hold it horizontally and scratch it across the surface of the paper, and you get this sort of random sort of look to the paint being applied to the paper. And I'll just make an attempt at putting some darker patches are there as well, as if the light's coming from the right, and one or two sort of tree trunks. It's not a particularly good example, so here's another picture I did of a scene in the Lake District, and the tree is done with this scratchy effect, pulling the paint on with the side of the brush. Right, let's see if we can use these techniques to draw a flower. Would you like to paint a flower? Let's do it. Sorry, my hand's slightly in the way here, but holding the brush upright and using the shape of the brush to go on and pull off the paper, you see. It's quite useful. So use the brush to use the tip of it as well as the body of it. Right, this blue, look, just dab those colours in. There's a nice blue going in. And associated with blue, of course, is purple. Let's dab some of that in as well and let the whole lot bleed out, just as you might see in the flower petal. And I'm giving it a shake around to get the paint to move around. And now again, with a smaller brush, I'm going to just help define those petal shapes. There's nothing sophisticated about these petal shapes, they're just a demonstration of how you can use the colours to blend them from one to another. But you'll notice the brush is quite upright, and while everything is wet, you can manipulate the shapes and the colours quite nicely. But it is rather subtle and you never know quite what's going to happen. So it's a bit of potluck really. Right, we're left with 1 or 2 holes at the end there. So I'm just going to get some water. That's just water, and just take the colour right to the end of those petals. So have a go at this. I think you'll find that's quite doable. Not too difficult at all. Right, another aspect of painting is to be quite spontaneous and fluid. Don't make these movements quite easy and in one go. And that way they will have more of a life about them. See, even that first one didn't work, but you can just go over it. So it's a matter of control and fluidity really to get some of these shapes on these leaves. Well, I do hope you found that informative and useful, and by all means comment and see if there's any more you want doing. There are lots of other things I could tell you about, and I'll move on to those in another video. So don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much if you've already done so, and click the little old bell, you know, it's good for you. And so yes, you will see me in the next video. Okay, bye for now then. Bye bye. Sorry about appearing in odd places in the middle of pictures for no particular reason, but I've only just found out how to do it, and it's good fun. I've just enjoyed myself really. Bye.